it's following the B share rate at a premium is the ceiling price. So that's the key. Is if you're assuming and you're making the assumption, which can be dangerous to make assumptions in this game, but if you're making the assumption that Icosa will tend to trend its Icosa ceiling price, then what you're saying is you're tying yourself to a B share at least a 35% premium that is only going to continue to go up. So to make the math simple, if you were looking at a 10,000x return in HEX, then in the B share rate chart, that's going to do a 14,000x. And if the premium stays at about 35 to 40%, that means the Icosa ceiling price is doing about 18,000x.
But remember, like at the moment, we're seeing huge demand for Icosa, and that's why it's staying at that ceiling price. But there's nothing for it to, there's no bottom like arb point or anything like that.
Yep.
So in the future, it will go down probably. It will play below that ceiling price. Maybe now is a really good point also to bring up like the Hedron HEX. I know people have called it a ceiling price. It's not at all a ceiling price. It's a really bad term for it. But that price where the amount of Hedron you can get from a stake can actually go and buy you that same stake again, like if you just borrowed the Hedron from it. That's the point that people are talking about. Now, as we approach that point, like what's going to happen? If you've got a HEX stake and you could like borrow in Hedron half the amount, not even the full amount, but half the amount, and go buy another stake that's half the size of that, a lot of people are already going to be starting to do it then. They're not going to wait for it to hit that ceiling price. So when people are starting to borrow the Hedron, cash it into HEX, and then buy another HEX stake, what it's doing is leveraging up. Like you as a person, as you're borrowing in order to get more HEX. And the reason it's so attractive is because, first of all, the rules are concrete. You know exactly how much you have to pay back in terms of Hedron, but also the interest that you pay on that borrow is probably one of the lowest interests you'll ever find in any lending platform, if not the most. And so it's going to be very tempting for people with HSIs to start leveraging up even before that point, like even halfway before that point. But then, and of course, when you do that, you're selling the Hedron. So you're pumping and buying HEX. So you're pumping the HEX price and dropping the Hedron price. So it means it'll get the price of Hedron in terms of HEX will probably get sluggish as it heads towards that point. But there's still nothing from stopping it from keep going up. And it can go way above that. It can keep going up. And even though people are dumping Hedron to get more HEX to leverage up, there's still nothing, that's going to stop other people from like jumping on Hedron and buying it up as well. And if you think about it really, really, really long term, HEX is an inflationary token. And it replicates, what do you call it? Compound. It replicates compound inflation. And so, but Hedron is the opposite. Hedron is going to get much, much harder over time because the HEX T-share price is going up. So you can't get as many Hedron in your T-shares. So over long periods of time, there's going to be tons and tons and tons of HEX coming into the system, while there'll be less and less Hedron in the system. So at some point, at some point they're going to swap over. And I think that, but it's also tricky because it's really interesting with HEX because all of that HEX is massively inflationary, but that inflation is always deferred out into the future. So at the moment, it's 6 or 7 years. So, but it's not like you get to that 6 or 7 year point and all of that comes out. People are going to be putting it out into the future that whole time leading up to that. So although HEX is very inflationary, it's always delayed into the future.